can jump in, so if I ask a question to April, I'm not restricting it to just her answer, but obviously I'm guiding it to the one that I think can answer it best. But please feel free to jump in. So let me begin with this about U.S. Soccer's decision to keep players in the U.S. national team into programming rather than allowing the players to continue to play with their clubs and or colleges leading up to the U17 and U20 World events. So April, share with me your opinion on that.
So when you're a national team coach, you understand that in front of you, depending on how far away, some cycles are 2 to 2.5 years away, some cycles are 1.5 years. In fact, the next cycle for our coaches will be about 15 months from now. So that's a really, by standards, typical standards for international game, that's a pretty short cycle. And so you have about 15 months to get your players together, to look at your lines, to create programming for them internationally. And international games are significantly more difficult to get on the girls' side than they are on the boys' side. At the particular under-20 age group, there's time frames that are very difficult to get international games because the players are playing in their professional first divisions. And so one of the things we do is we start from the World Championship date and we back it up from there and we try to put some programming together. So the programming could consist of back-to-back camps, international tournaments. There's only really one international tournament on the FIFA calendar for the under-20 age group, and that's in March. So we try to build to that, and then you come out of that with a little bit of understanding with what your players and your lines and your core and your pool looks like, and then you build around the calendar. So some cycles include, unfortunately, a World Cup that's held in the fall. I think that was what we had this past cycle. So of the 6 under-20 cycles that we've had so far, 2 World Cups have been, under-20 World Cups have been held in the fall. All the others, and by FIFA preference, those under-20 World Cups are typically held in June, July, August. But this particular recent one and 2 out of the 6 have been held in the fall. So if you look at the programming with 15 months, for example, to prepare, then you've got 1 calendar year plus the last couple months. 1 calendar year roughly to prepare for qualifying, and then 3 to 6 months to prepare for the actual World Cup. So the decision that we made, and I should talk about the under-17 World Cup, those cycles are less predictable because FIFA sets the 20 World Cup and then they set the under-17 World Cup dates. And quite often that means the under-17 World Cup could go from being a 2-year cycle to a 13, 14 month cycle. And then you back that up with qualifying, it gets incredibly short, a short period of time. So as a national team coach, of course, you want to bring your team periodically together to train them, to get them the international experience. And when it gets closer to the World Cup, we've had a wildly successful program in residency, putting our players in residency. And in fact, I think over the Women's World Cup history, if we've had a residency in place, we've been more successful in that World Cup and that Olympic cycle. If we haven't had a residency program, we've not been as successful. So, of course, that's about days together.
So let me have a follow-up on that. In April, we've won 2 U20 World Championships, and during those 2 World Championships for the U20s, they were also in the fall, and those 2 teams were allowed to play into their players were allowed to play into their collegiate seasons, and we won. So you can imagine how all of us in the collegiate community felt when our kids were being taken away during the season when they could have been playing for us, because in the U17 cycle, local kids, slammers, Gabby Suarez, basically was on the Mexican U17s. She plays here locally, and she led the Mexican team in goals, and Mexico had a good run at the U17 level. Another kid from Mexico, Kiana Palacios from Mexico, also jumped into the 20s and led UCI in goals, and then was loaned out for the World Cup and was very effective for Mexico in goals. And so I guess the impression I have is that if you're taking the college kids away, and certainly the youth kids away from their home clubs, with the evidence that if you allow them to play in, we've had extraordinary success. I guess the way we feel is you feel the programming is more effective than obviously playing into our seasons. And so do you mind addressing that?
Sure. Well, I'll go back to the first part of your question, Anson. We've actually won 3 under-20 World Cups.
I know the U19 championship was won in a non-fall season. That was before it switched to U20. That's when
Yeah.
Tracy Bates-Leon was coaching the team. I do remember that.
Yeah. And so of the 6 under-20, under-19 World Cups, we've won 3, and all of the others, with the exception of this past year, 2016 and 2008, they were held outside the fall college season. They were in August that rolled into late August. So there's been 2 in there, and we won 1 of them. And I think that was a wildly successful team. You know, with players that came out of the 2002 under-20 World Cup, unbelievable crop of players. Heather O'Reilly, Lori Kalukny, Ashlyn Harris, incredible crop of players that really went on to and played and had wildly successful careers with our women's team. Same with 2008. That was also a really great cycle. The players that came out of our 2008 under-20 team that moved on to the women's team, Alex Morgan, Megan Klingenberg, I believe. There was quite a few out of that cycle. So, and then when you talk about the under-17 player cycle, I think the players are, as you know, as a coach, right? And we all, I think in the room, I think almost all of us in the room are coaches. You want your players together. And you referenced Mexico's success, and their under-20s were really good this year. Their under-17s this 2 years ago were a very impressive group. And so the world has changed even since the 2008 World Cup, under-20 World Cup, the world of the competition. So I think the approach that our coaches are taking is that they want maximum amount of time with their players before they lead up to the actual World Cup, to formulate their team chemistry, to build the strength and spine of their team, and to be able to put their players, and be able to have players come off the bench, and be able to have a team that's out there that represents us, that can compete for a World Cup.
Okay, thank you. And actually, there were 2 full champions that played kids in the collegiate cycle. So there was more than one.
Sorry.
One was coached by Swanson, the other one was coached by DeChico. And the reason I know this, of course, I had kids on both teams that didn't play, that played with us during our season and moved on. I got a question now for Christian. I was just in a meeting with our federation leadership, and I was told that they had tried for 3 years to try to get you to sort out some of their best practices, and that you and the ECNL were not that interested in cooperating. So how do we create a more collaborative relationship between U.S. Soccer and the ECNL?
Well, thank you. I'm glad you asked that question, because I've heard statements about that. I think what we've done in the ECNL more effectively than anything else is create a collaboration and a collaborative environment with people from all over the country. And when we started in 2009, one of the common statements we heard was that there was no way that we would be able to bring together coaches from youth soccer and have them agree on anything, much less have them compromise to reach a bigger goal. And I think we've done that by being totally transparent. Now, in that process, as we all know, there's however many people in this room, there's probably at least that many different opinions on certain topics. So philosophically, it's our opinion that we need to embrace diversity of thought and opinion and perspective, and we need to talk through and identify best solutions to problems, best ways to change the game, and you do that in a process that takes a little bit of time. Now, we had a fantastic relationship with the Federation, and I think when Jill and April first came on board full-time, Jill was the development director, and I think a lot of people across the country would say there were a lot of bridges built between club soccer and the national teams that was very, very positive. We've had discussions with them off and on. We updated the Federation. I was in a meeting with you, Jared, I think the last time in early 2015, updating everything we do and why we do it, and inviting feedback, inviting perspective, and inviting discussion. The common hot button areas that come up in talking about differences of opinion are substitution rules, which would be one. In 2012, our under 18 age group had a no reentry substitution rule because we said, let's try this and see how it goes. I've never gotten so many hate mail in my life than I got that year from everywhere. I was asked if I would pay for people's colleges when they didn't get recruited because of the substitution rule.
How did you reply to that one?
I didn't. But so we did it that year. It was very tough, and there was a lot of divided opinion within our league on that. And then after that year, we actually spoke with the federation and said, what do you think? We were debating going down to younger age groups in the substitution rule. And the feedback we got at the time was, you know what, don't worry about it. Do what you think is appropriate, because we don't think the substitution rule is that big of an impact on development. Now, there can be different opinions on that. You know, and one of the perspectives is our best players at youth soccer are playing 90 minutes generally, or 80, 85 in most games. Obviously, college soccer has a very different substitution rule, so whatever physiological changes happen in youth are going to be different in college. And we decided if it wasn't something that was a strong desire that was clearly stated, that it wasn't something that we felt there was enough agreement or perspective on in the youth to do that. Another hot button topic has been coaching education and coach licensing. And we're pretty proud of the programming that we've put together in education. I think over the last 5 years, we've had probably 12 to 15 different coaching development events where we bring in experts to talk about various topics. Our last one was a couple months ago. We brought a 3-star Marine general in to talk about leadership and talk about management from a different type of perspective. We're going to spend probably north of $50,000 in 2 weeks back here in San Diego on a 3-day coaching symposium. And so we've made a big commitment to coaching education. We talked about licensing, and I know licensing mandates is another hot topic, and our perspective on that was we aren't comfortable mandating licensing until we knew that all of the coaches who needed the next license, whatever was mandated, could get into the course. And that's been a tough process, because there's such a demand for the courses, and I think Jared and the people in the coaching department would acknowledge that, that we didn't want to put mandates in that we then would be stuck in a position saying, well, we know we mandated it, but we know you couldn't get into it, and so now what do we do? So we've decided to put our resources in that respect into other types of educational program, again, with the perspective that different philosophies from across the world, from different subject matter experts, are going to be the best way that we raise the game, and that we develop better players and better coaches, because people need to take all those perspectives in, wrestle with them, figure out what they believe and what they think is right for them. And so I would say, to touch directly on your question, we're always interested in discussions.
Okay.
We're always interested in collaborating. We're always interested in working together, and that process can be messy. Okay. It can be long-term, and as we've talked before, that can be really fatiguing, because it means you have to sit down and debate and argue, and sometimes those things get hot. But
let's do this. April, why don't you and Jared jump in if you like on this, because obviously you guys are also experts in this area. Anything to add to what Christian's chatting about?
I'm surprised this thing is square, by the way. But at any rate, yeah, the collaboration is extremely important, because you have to, and it's not just between two programs, it's the greater piece of education in general, and that's not just coaching licenses either. So that's a process that is one of the most important things that we're doing right now as a federation is coaching education. But it's not just by taking a license, it's what you're doing in your everyday environment. The people in the room who are head coaches, they're continuing education for their assistant coaches. And academy directors, the same thing for their group of academy coaches and anyone that's in their club. So I share that because I think that the themes that are coming up are discussions that are actually ongoing. And we've had another meeting this week with membership, and Christian and I were in another extended meeting talking about what standards are and how you can have collaboration and pulling things together, because a group that has an aligned set of principles moving forward towards things that are in the best interest of players is what we all want.
I agree. And by the way, Tom Byer, he's connected with a culture that we're now trying to emulate, because what the Japanese have done, certainly in his tenure there as a coach, is extraordinary. So please know that even though a lot of these questions initially are going to bounce between the other three, I've got some questions for Tom at the end, and his insights will be extraordinary, so please be patient with me. April, next question is, there are rumors out there that you would like to see a paradigm shift in our soccer culture to mirror a more European model, basically to where our men's game is going right now. Possibly restructuring, restricting college coaches from attending national youth team events, or at least making it more challenging for them to look at rosters, or even suggesting that long term that skipping college entirely is something that we have to consider doing because we've got to compete with the rest of the world. So please let me know how you really feel about all that, please.
Yeah. I'll start with the third piece, I think.
Okay.
We do have some very special young players in America. We had one maybe 15 years ago who came up to me. You'll remember her actually, Alicia Kramer.
Sure.
She came up to me as probably a U19-ish player, U18, U19-year-old player, and said, the Women's Professional League is starting, the WUSA. This would have been circa 2001, so 16 years ago. And she said, do you think I should bypass college soccer and go into the WUSA? And I thought, wow, times have changed. Times have changed. Where a 18, 19-year-old, very promising player for us was thinking about that. The easy answer 16 years ago and the easy answer today is that's not a realistic choice for 99.9% of our players. I was a college coach for the better part of the first 15 years of my career. Coached at the University of Maryland, cut my teeth there, coached at the University of Virginia. My first ever coaching job was at William & Mary, coached at Princeton University, and more recently in 2006 at UC Irvine. To my core, I am a college coach and still value the college game. And all of the people in the crowd and here at this convention that I love to see are college coaches. Those are the people that I really cut my teeth with as a coach. So I have a tremendous respect for the college game. I have a tremendous respect for what those 4 years do for a young player developmentally, both on and off the field. So imagine my surprise when I came back to U.S. Soccer in 2011, and I had a young woman come to me and say, I'm thinking about bypassing college and going straight to Europe. What do you think? And she was on my under-18 team at that time. I think you might know her as well, Lindsay Rand. So she was actually considering going to North Carolina. And I'm in the national team camp, and she's saying, what do you think, Coach? Should I go to Europe? And I said, well, first of all, Lindsay, women's professional players don't make that much money.
She was an exception.
The 4-year education is so important. The minute you activate your professional status, you can never get that back. You cannot get it paid for. You can always go back to college, but you can't get it paid for. And here you have an opportunity to go into the best institutions in the country and play soccer and get your degree. I think you should go to college. And since that day, that would have been, I don't know, 2011 or 12. I've had only one other athlete in our entire youth national team program come to ask me, should I bypass college? And the answer is still the same. I value the education that these players are getting on the soccer field. I value the competition that they're getting there. And I still advise them to stay in college. Lindsay, of course, bypassed. But she's actually the only one that I know of that's bypassed. So that's not a piece of advice that we're giving our athletes.
Yeah, and what's happening now, which is kind of cool for the American colleges, the paradigm in Europe is actually changing, because now the kids that Chelsea's trying to sign and Arsenal are trying to sign to professional contracts, they know they're not going to get on the field for the first team, and so they're being shipped off to Sunderland and all these places they don't want to go to. And so now that group, of course, are coming to the American colleges. So, April, I appreciate that statement.
And Anthony,
Go ahead.
I'll even
Yeah.
add another piece to that. There's a couple countries that are very codependent on our college game.
Right. Go ahead. Yeah, address that. I think that's a great issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple countries where Canada and Mexico, they desperately need those positions to help their 18 to 22-year-olds develop. And we do our best to track those players as well, but also track American players that have an affiliation. Greece, we're seeing players in America pop up with Greek, Portuguese, Brazilian relationships. I mean, one of the great players on the Brazil Olympic team, she played, a part of my memory, she played at university in the South, and she was a tremendous player for Brazil. So our college game is not just developing players for our national team program, it's developing players for Canada, it's developing players for Mexico, and there's some countries abroad now that are really benefiting from our college.
No, April, absolutely. I appreciate you going there, because obviously I think we've got a gem of a player development platform, 17 to 21. So I appreciate that. Christian, this is going to be an uncomfortable question, but you're agile verbally, so I'm curious about this. The ECNL obviously is not... you'll be able to handle this. The ECNL obviously is not happy with the incursion of the DA. But here's what's interesting. The core of the ECNL leadership is protected by basically having their feet in both camps. That there's a collection of our ECNL leaders that are embracing the DA but still have full, advantage of the ECNL. So how do you sort of rationalize that decision by our ECNL leadership?
This is where I get agile.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it, yeah. So how do we rationalize that?
No, we'll be totally straightforward with it. I mean, I don't know how many of our clubs actually are embracing change. I think there's been a lot of concern that change is coming where many did not want it. In fact, we did a survey of our membership about a year and a half ago and asked a couple of questions. One of the questions was, do you believe the development academy is necessary or is it important to change the game and make it better? We had 84 responses and 7 said yes. So I think it's a small number that is embracing a change. Now, what almost everybody responded with was a question that said, if there is a development academy, what relationship would you like to have between the ECNL and the development academy? And that answer was overwhelmingly some type of collaboration or cooperation.
Actually, then, can you paint the perfect blend of both for us, and then we'll turn it over to your colleagues on your left.
Well, I have some ideas.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, I think, first of all, anytime there's discussion about adding resources to youth soccer, it's a fantastic thing, because we all know that youth soccer is limited in resources. And so when you're adding more opportunity, when you're adding more platforms, that's a great thing. I think it's really important that those things are additive, not duplicative, that they're actually very targeted for specific purposes. So I think we have a system that works really, really well for all of the players, But the very, very best players could always be challenged in a different way, or could be given a different opportunity. So, and I know we live in a country that is, you know, as the Spanish guys, we've been working with, say, we live in a continent. And so we have a huge issue with distance and size and all that sort of thing. But I would think, and you guys would probably have different thoughts or have thought through some of this, but an additive program where, you know, I call it as simple as like the national guard model, where you took the best players from certain regions. So if we take a 3 or 4 state area and bring them together for a weekend a month or whatever type of frequency, and you brought them for training and competition, whatever the schedule made sense of, for 3 days a month, maybe it's twice a month sometimes, I don't know. But where you bring them out of their regular environment, you have a best versus best environment, you interact with them, and then they go back to their regular environment to bring that information back, to bring their perspective back, to have that impact the players around them. I think that also is a fantastic way to bring the coaches involved with those players into that. So you could have it not only as a player experience, but you could have it as a coaching education experience. So you bring these coaches who are working with these players every day, because ultimately it's our position as a league that the people that are on the ground and that are developing and working with players Monday through Friday, talking to their parents, dealing with all the things that happen in youth soccer, are the ones that are most informed about what they need, and also are the ones that are going to be most effective at helping them. And so I think some type of additive program that really targets that 1% with additional options. And by the way, that would pull them out of club competition for those times. That would pull them out for club training sessions on the recovery ends, either side of it. Those are easy things to solve. So I think that type of program takes what is working, adds to it, and that's just one idea. I mean, you can
Well, let's do this. Let's let Ben jump in. So, do you guys see a possibility of a blend, Jared and April, between the two groups?
Yeah, I made this statement before. I think there has to be a blend, but it's beyond the two groups. It's a blend of everything that's being done.
Yeah,
So,
Jared and I chatted earlier, and he, of course, I'm just talking about the two groups, but he's much more comfortable with the landscape, and you talk about the 5 groups. So
Yeah.
go ahead, address
Yeah.
that with him. Yeah.
when you start to talk about the entire player pool, it's not about 1,000 players here or 10,000 players in the academy or the number of thousands of players in the ECNL. It's about what's happening at grassroots level, and that starts with a lot of the clubs that are ECNL clubs or DA clubs or clubs that are in another program or league. Those groups have players that are in grassroots, below the age of 12. And Tom, I'm sure, can talk about the models he's in because he's spending a lot of his time there. And he has, kids that are at that age, so he's seen it every day. So for us, when we look at it, how it can blend together, when you say, well, how are they different, or how can they coexist? They could, and we could create this additive 1% supplemental, which we do. And I don't know the familiarity with the group in the room, but obviously national team programming is supplemental training. But that's not the way to develop a player. A player develops in their club every day in a consistent everyday environment with quality coaches where they're trained 4+ times a week and playing a consistent game schedule over a 10-month period where that week in and week out the players got some consistency. And for us, that's where then it becomes a little bit difficult because it's just like everyone said, everyone has different opinions and different thoughts on it. But if we don't have the right environment for the player in every day, then we think that becomes a challenge. And this, training centers, national teams, etc. We've had a residency program on the boys that we talked about the positives of residency leading into World Cup cycles. But this is at the players, 15, 16 years old for a very specific reason. We don't think that's the best way to do it. And when we have 4.2+ million players in this country, that's one of our benefits. We've got to have programming and a model that expands the influence to every club and every community in the country. So when you have a club that's rooted in player development, hopefully what they're doing and what their coaches are doing is contagious, and it's things that can be shared in every community. And so that's where for us it's about creating that consistent everyday environment. And there's ways for things to overlap, and sure, there's going to be players or that are maybe in one program and go to another and vice versa, but that comes back to there's options. There's, again, 4 million players, and we're talking about not even 1%. We're talking about 20,000 female players.
Well, let me do this. Let me bring someone that comes from a culture of 35,000 players from cradle to grave, and what they've achieved is absolutely extraordinary. So, Tom, What elements of the Japanese culture can we steal and safely inject into our culture to help us close this gap with what's happening positively in Japan? And then also tee off on the U14, U16 teams that did so extraordinarily well, but talk about the experience of the lack thereof with their coaches.
Sure. 35,000 registered players for the JFA, girls and women's. Everything on paper says that the Japanese women's team should not be as successful as they are. A couple of insights into the girl program. First of all, up until the age of 12, all girls are integrated in with the boys. They play on boys teams. A majority of the very good players, if you look at some of the different cycles, when our team won in 2011 World Cup, whether it's Sawa, whether it's Miyama Aya, whether it's Nagasato, all of those girls played on boys teams, and in specific, their fathers were the coaches, not Sawa, but a couple of them. So what we're finding is that technical skills, and this is the inconvenient truth, is rarely the result of coaching. It's a result of cultures. And if you look at great countries throughout the world, and again, there's insights to be taken from the men's game. If you look at in FIFA, there's 211 member associations, 8 have won a World Cup, 3 are serial repeaters. But when you really put the development under a microscope, you'll find that those cultures are conducive to developing players. And that's the reality of it. If you think about it, here in our country, here in the United States, the reality is that the players just are not good enough technically, and I'm talking about young kids. And in Japan, we've been able to take that gap between the very best player and the worst player and close it. And I'm sorry to say, but in the United States here, it pains me to say, the gap between the very best and the worst is the Pacific Ocean. It's way too big. And until you start closing that gap and figuring out also that it's not necessarily an elite problem in this country. I believe in Japan, you have to live there, like I've lived there for 32 years. There is no special sauce of coaching in Japan that makes those girls or our boys as good as they are. There isn't. The coaching here at the elite level, much better than it would ever be in Japan. And for example, if you look at the 2014 Women's World Cup in Costa Rica, where Japan won the tournament, they scored 23 goals for, they allowed 2. The coach of that team, Asako Takakura, very good dear friend of mine, that was her first coaching job. She had never been the head coach of any team. She'd been on the staff as an assistant, and one of the reasons that she was the coach is because the JFA wanted to appoint a woman, first ever, as a national team coach. There's only 3 women in the country that have an A license. She's one of them. You look at this past cycle, 2016, again, almost the exact results too. Almost scored 23 goals for, a couple against. They were the United States that scored, but they lost in the finals on penalties. Let's look at the makeup of that team. The coach has never coached a women's team, ever. In fact, most people don't even know who he is. He came from a J-League 3rd Division club as an assistant. And the reason that they appointed him in that position was that they basically could not find anybody else to do the job. That's the truth. And so and one of the big insights I draw into that is that, well, how can 2 teams, 2 different cycles, get to the final, one they win, one they lose on penalties, with very, very inexperienced coaches? And because, and this is just my belief, is that when the younger you get and the better they are technically, it's almost on autopilot. It's almost on autopilot. It's almost disregardless of who that coach is at the very young age. Now, of course, when you get older, the technical component, the tactical, if those are equal, then the physical component plays into it. And that's why I think our girls here do so well as well. But I think there has to be a rethink. And if you think of one of the major problems in this country is that 38.5% of children in this country by the age of 7 drop out of the sport. 50% don't make it to the age of 10. Can you imagine that you've got a business and half of your customer base you're losing? Only 3% of eligible kids that can play soccer in this country play. So you have to have a rethink. And in China, where I'm working, where we're focusing on is that we're focusing on more, not so much on the coaches' education. That is important, and I have affection for coaches because I am one, but it's more on the parents. Can you develop players by the age of 6 before they ever come to you or anybody as coaches and they have some technical competency. And I could keep talking about it, but I don't want to kill up all the time. But there's
Actually,
some-
Tom, this would be valuable because obviously the impact you can have just with the simple explanation of coaching U6 is phenomenal. I mean, you could spend 2 minutes on that.
Sure.
Everyone in this room could do it and expand it within their league, and the impact could be overwhelming. So talk about U6.
Sure. Well, in Japan, for 14 straight years, I was casted on Japan's #1 television show for children. That's produced by the producers of Pokemon. So I present every weekday morning. Corner is called Tom-san, my name Tom, Tom-san Soccer Techniques, which basically empowered kids to be able to practice on their own. And you can imagine it's going on every single day for 14 years. Also being featured in Japan's #1 comic book called Koto Comic, 1.2 million copies per month, every month, 2 full pages. Just always talking, making the entry level for the sport technical. If you go around to most parks in the world, here in the United States, on a weekend, you'll find them filled with little kids, fathers, mothers, and they're kicking the ball back and forth. So the entry point for the game for 3, 4, 5-year-olds is kicking or shooting. I did an experiment, not experiment, what happened was is that I've been a technical coach for quite a long time, and I have 2 children of my own. And in 2006, I had a complete rethink of development. I was doing an event for one of my sponsors at Adidas, and I was signing these little tiny miniature balls from the World Cup, German World Cup, and I was giving them to kids. And the proverbial ball, so to speak, fell right in my lap. While I was holding the small ball, I thought, wow, my boy had just started walking. I thought, small ball, small foot, small body. I asked the Adidas guys to send me a box of these balls, and 16 balls arrived at my house. I put 2, 3 balls in every room. And from day one, when my boy would step up to address the ball, I would discourage him from kicking.
How old is he?
He's 2 years old.
Okay, there we
one
go.
years old, when he says 1.5, when start worrying. And I discouraged him from kicking, and I encouraged him to just start pulling the ball back with the sole of his feet. And more importantly, learning how to protect the ball from a very young age. And what I did was, I documented his development. Not just his, but my second boy's as well. And I was shocked to see the pace of acceleration of how good they both became technically. So I put together a presentation. And again, this happened mostly inside the living room because, and I'm sure some of you have children, a child between the ages of 0 and 5, their whole life is in the living room. You can't let the child, the mother, father, whoever the caretaker is, let them out of line of sight. So I made these balls basically part of the environment, call it the favorite toy or what have you. But just from that experience, and that was the entry level of teaching my kids, so I documented it. I put a presentation together showing, and I started connecting so many dots. I started reading national curriculums from countries and found that the first time the kids come on the radar screen is between 6 and 9. They call it the discovery phase. They build characteristics, clumsy, lack of motor skills, a short attention span. So play fun games related to soccer. So a lot of people don't expect or imagine that kids can learn things like that. So I started challenging that, because now I'm saying, no, we have to have a rethink, because kids as young as 2, 3, 4, 5, and if any of you have seen my presentation, it's pretty compelling when you see what can a 3-year-old do with a football, or a 4-year-old do with a football. And I took this presentation around the world, the pinnacle of which Ryan Giggs from Manchester United had heard about it and asked me to come to Manchester to see the presentation. I showed it to him. He asked me to show up to his restaurant the next day, and he brought Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Paul Scholes, and Nicky Butt. And I showed them the presentation. The German Bundesliga asked to see it as well. I sent a delegation to my hotel in Beijing, which included Karl-Heinz Riedel, great World Cup champion. So I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but I've been going around now in the world. Recently in Geneva, I presented to 50 technical directors from UEFA, including the academy directors of Ajax, Feyenoord, and some of the biggest clubs in the world. And we're finding there is a major gap in football or soccer development that people have not understanding how players develop. We think that the great players in the world, that lightning is striking in a bottle. When they see videos of my kid at 5 or 6, they think, whoa, he's the next Messi. No, he's not. What it is that the expectations for players at 5 or 6 is so low, when they actually see some kid that's good, it's like, wow. So these are just...
It's fantastic.
Sorry to kill a lot.
No, that was great, Tom, I appreciate it. April, I'm going to throw this one at you, but Jared, jump in because you're the expert on this platform. Southern California is the golden goose of U.S. player development and have consistently contributed a lion's share of U.S. players at every level. If we go from the current 8-team club model, or 8 club model to 13, isn't there a chance we're going to kill this golden goose? Because that's a part of the sort of the DA direction. So talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah. So the process to select Girls Development Academy clubs was fairly extensive. Probably we accepted applications for about 2 months. Correct me if I'm wrong, dear. Jared, it was about 120 applications?
No, a little over 200.
200, sorry. 200. So about 200 applications. We reviewed those applications, and whether you're talking about Southern California, Texas, Atlanta, Florida, Northern Cal, whatever, we really resisted the temptation to throw a dart on the wall and say that's the perfect number of clubs in that area. Colorado is another good example. There's some good clubs in Colorado. I'm from Colorado. What we tried to do is say, let's look at the market independently. Let's look at some lessons learned from the Boys Development Academy, some best practices from their selection process, and let's look at the population of players and quality players, and let's see what number makes sense. So it was very different in all of those climates. So for example, Colorado is also one of the top, I think, 5 producers of our players historically over the last 10 years. And there were many clubs in the state of Colorado. What made sense? In California, what number made sense? So it was a little bit of a push-pull for a couple of months on what made sense. So we wanted, no matter the market, we wanted to be more inclusive in the first year. 25% of our players in the youth national team program in the last year have come from the state of California. Southern California is our #1 youth national producer of players, and Northern Cal is the #3 producer of youth national team players. You can fit the country of Japan in the state of California. So there's a lot of players in the state of California. And so again, what we wanted to do is try to figure out, in some cases, geographically. For example, the surf club had really been in San Diego surfer. So did it make sense to have some inclusion south of San Diego, all the way up to the border with Mexico? Did it make sense to have some inclusion between where the surf are located and where that meets Orange County? And then up, if you know the geography, of course you all know the geography, you're in California. You start to get all the way up the coast to about Santa Barbara, and then how much inland. So we had a tremendous belief. We have a team of people on the ground that have been working with club coaches for the last 6 years. And I would say this, and I'll let you say a few things about the boys selection process. But when we selected the Boys Development Academy, I don't think we had any full-time coaches on staff whose job was out there and being out there in the community, in the club community. In the case of the Girls Development Academy, we did have some people, not the same resources the boys had, but we had some people out there working with our clubs to help identify the clubs we thought had the resources, the facilities, the coaches, the players. So we just tried to spread it out. I don't know what number is the magic number. We never talk about a magic number, no matter the region. We just talk about being more inclusive. So is 4 better than 5? Is 5 better than 4? And to a certain extent, we wanted the market to, it's self-selection in, and we thought that some of them would self-select out. So you know what? After further thought, we submitted our application, but we're not sure we can do all this. So we're gonna pull ourselves out. And better to have them self-select out than us to, before we even started the competition, to pick is this club better than that club? Certainly we had to pick the top club, which we felt the top club was.
Okay, let me do this. Just, yeah, you want to jump in, Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to go back, because I think it's tied.
Okay.
What Tom was talking about.
Okay.
Because I think your work and your findings are really unbelievable. And when we talk about changing the game and making it better, we're spending all this time talking about the 14 to 18 age group, where, and your points about the Japan FA is really telling. I mean, at the end of the day, the best coach is the best players. And so if we want to really change the game and we have the massive resources of the federation, I would think the best way to do that is to focus on that 6 to 12 age group. I mean, and let's face it, everybody in this room, as soon as you start coaching, where does everybody gravitate? They gravitate to the older age groups, the more prestigious age groups, the age groups where there's more of an income. And so if we were to say, let's be additive, let's go back to saying, how do we make the U.S. the best country in the world in women's soccer and keep it that way forever? 14 to 18, I mean,
Too late.
it's too late.
Yeah.
And we can pick anybody to coach. Coach teams with the best players, and they're going to win 99% of their games. But if the player can't receive a ball, if the player can't move properly, biomechanically, if they can't strike a ball, well then what are we talking about the tactics? So I think to your point, that's where the focus should be. If you really want meaningful change, not high profile, let's make things exciting. Let's make a long-term focus. And I think that's a discussion in some of the meetings that we've had before, that it always is a discussion, and then everything turns to what's more exciting. And I think that's a problem, and that's why we continue to say this player's not technically good enough, that player's not technically good enough, our style of play isn't good enough. It's because then we put players in there and say, play like Barcelona, and they can't pass the ball.
Christian, good. Yeah, Tom wants to continue the discussion by all means. And right after Tom finishes, I'm going to throw one more question to April about female coaches and a pathway, and then we'll open it up to the room. So think of a question you'd like to ask any panelist, but go ahead, Tom.
Okay, I wanted that clarification too. I said that the second cycle, the under-17 national team coach was a man, and that nobody wanted the job. I was incorrect. What I meant to say is that there was no woman available. We only have 3A licenses, and 3 of them are occupied. That's why the guy got it. Now, what the insight I want to say is that my son, when he's 6 years old, the first time you come in to organize soccer in Japan is in first grade, and you're 6. Boys, girls integrated into the same team.
Yeah, this room has an interesting design. There have been 100 people that have walked up and then took off, so yeah.
Yeah, one real quick insight. My son goes into his first practice, and because he's so good technically already by the age of 6, his entry and level point is here. There's 22 kids on the team. 2 or 3 other kids are halfway decent. I find out their dads were players. The other 18 players have never played the game, so they're starting from a zero sum. Now in Japan, they're practicing every Tuesday, 4:30 to 7 o'clock. Thursday, 4:30 to 7 o'clock. Any Saturday, Sunday, could be both days, half day, full day, one day. It depends. That's a lot of soccer. 52 weeks a year. My son's coach, here I am, one of the technical coaches in Japan, is coached by a rugby player. He's never played soccer, never coached it, but here's the insight. After 5 years of watching the players play, after 5 years, the breakup of the team again. My son's the best player, 2 or 3 kids good, 18 players, you can almost see no to little progress. Those are the 18 kids that are at danger of dropping out of the sport, the 38.5% or the 50%. And my son keeps developing. And you know why? I only realized this recently. Because he's not overcoached. He's able to play the way that he wants to play because the rugby guy doesn't know anything about soccer. So he doesn't force anything. I think that's a very big insight.
Tom, that's excellent. Thank you. April, let me throw this your way, and right after April jumps in with this, we'll open it up. I attended a great conference earlier in the week about women in soccer, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I would be remiss if I didn't give April a chance to chat about this, because I was moved by all the extraordinary female leaders in the room. So April, just help us out. What percentage of club/college coaches are women? How do we include more female coaches, and what is missing in the female pathway?
Thanks for the question, Anthony. I really appreciate that. Of course, I'm passionate about trying to get more women into coaching. I have my eye on women, former players, before they ever retired. I'm like, when am I going to actually approach them and then say to them, how do we get them try to target them as soon as we can. The mantra I use is recruit, reward, and retain. So the single most important, welcome back. The single most important piece of this mantra is the recruitment piece. So it's a profession that has a lot of weekends, as you all know, and evenings. So I think that we can get women involved in coaching, between the ages of about 15 and 25. And then after about 25, they start to, I'm sure the drop-off is similar to the player drop-off that Tom mentioned. And then by the time they're 40, they're done, because they've probably made a choice, a personal choice, to have a family, and they don't see the family coinciding with their coaching career. So recruit, retain, reward. The recruitment piece is vital. You can't just go, and I have a lot of coaches call me and say, I'm looking for a coach, at the college level, do you have any women? And I'll usually try to get back with them a couple of days. You cannot make 3 phone calls and then give up on it. You have to have grit when it comes to finding a female to be on your staff. You have to have grit. Because unfortunately, if there's a job description and there are 10 qualifications, 10 requirements for the job, if a woman looks at it, and this is scientifically, there's research paper on, if there's 10 qualifications and a woman looks at those qualifications and she's missing 1, she doesn't apply. She's like, I'm not qualified. If a man looks at that and he is missing 5 to 7, he still thinks he's the best one. And you know me enough, Anson, I'm not trying to be funny here. That's actually a true story.
And I absolutely agree with you. I
Yeah.
coach men and women. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, so the recruitment piece is absolutely vital. You can't make 3 calls and then give up. You've got to be determined. You've got to put them in a position. And then I literally just had a conversation with Lori Kolupny and Julia Sitch, sorry. And I said to both of them, what's your career path? And how do we get you guys involved in women's soccer? And Lori Kolupny's already out there coaching. And Lori, when can we get you into a national team camp? Because I think this woman has the real potential to be a special national team coach. And she smiled and hemmed and hawed and didn't give me an answer. And I said, so should I read between the lines here, Lori? Is that not interested, busy, trying to start a family? How can I? So the key to read between the lines on their answers is a part of the recruitment piece I think is critical. And she said, no, I'm interested. Okay, so does that mean permission to be proactive and calling quite frequently? Just to figure out what date work? So you have to be persistent to get your women involved. It doesn't matter the level. And then retain them. You've got to protect them, right? It's been 30 years, Anson, but my first coaching job was a club coach in Reston, Virginia. And I was straight out of the national team program, and I had parents all over me. You've been working with my daughter for 6 months, and we haven't won a championship yet. And so the parents were very hard, and it's the #1 reason I called Anson, I don't know if you even remember the call, but it's like, oh my God, this coaching with the parents. It's why I went to the college game immediately. So when you get women in your clubs, don't let the parents loose on them right away. Put them in a position where they're not accountable to the parents initially. Put them in a position where they're maybe your technical trainers for 2 to 3 nights a week. Put them in a position where they're they're getting their roots into the profession. They're coaching daily and gaining their confidence, and they're not being held accountable for wins. Get them in a position where parents aren't coming up to them. Think about it. A 6'5" guy comes up to me and starts talking to me. When I was 25 years old, that was unbelievably intimidating. Now I'm older than all these parents. And I'm like, patience, Dad, patience. So recruit, retain. And part of the retention piece is putting them in their right fit. Shannon Box is another person I recently had a conversation with. Shannon, you're living in Portland. Portland FC's, Girls Development Academy. You need them, they need you, you're Shannon Box. Go to them. Write your job description. Write your job coach 3 days a week for them. If you need a salary and you're looking for a full-time job, tell them you'll coach 2 of their teams. 4 nights a week, and if you're not comfortable with games yet, don't take the game setting yet. Let somebody else on the staff. So recruit, retain. And then you have to reward them. And reward for women is different than it is for men. The reward piece is you don't have to come to the parents' meeting every month. You don't have to go to the board meetings. And we're going to pay you well. In Shannon Box's case, she should get paid quite well. She's a world champion 2 times over. 1 time over, sorry, Olympic champion 2 times over. So reward them and help them find a way to have the balance that the women need in life.
Let's give the distinguished panel a nice round of applause. I'll only keep you for another 5 minutes, so let's get as many questions as we can and make the answers as quick as possible. But let me have a Q&A, so throw your hand in the air, pick a panelist out, and ask the question. I can't see because there's a light in my eyes, so if you're somewhere, go ahead.
I am really excited that you're here, and the message that I'm getting is that we should not be looking at our children as competitive only and recreational. And what I'm hearing is that we need to encourage more at the younger ages, which families don't think that they're competitive players. Can I ask you how you feel about putting that title onto a child or to a team?
So who's the question directed to?
It doesn't matter, any
Okay.
of them.
So the question, the title of competitive versus recreation.
Yeah, what can we
Correct?
do? Yeah.
So I think that's an obligation for everyone, and we're constantly trying to figure out what's the right distance for a 12-year-old to travel, what about an 8-year-old, and how much time should they spend in training, and how many days a week. So I think one thing that we try to do, and the Federation has a role in this, is to develop player development. So we recently, you'll hear them referred to as PDIs. So they're out there, and it helps to structure and provide landscape. We've also created an F license, which is designed around the base coach, our parents, even anyone who's trying to get educated in the game. And then we're currently working on building grassroots models too, because it comes back to education. And when people are educated, then I think they'll stop calling them competitive and recreational, because they'll start to see them as a 6-year-old, not a competitive 6-year-old or a recreational 6-year-old. And that's what we have to do, because you talk about the statistics that Tom mentioned, 38.5% at this age, and 50. I mean, we have 4 million plus players, and after the age of 13, we've got a couple 100,000 that are still left in recreation. So it's got to be fun. It's got to be the right. The label's one thing, but it's got to be the right environment.
Jared, thank you. Again, just a couple more questions because obviously we have to clear the room. So by all means, Diane.
Thank you. I'm just curious, and I don't mean to be obtuse, but this next couple of months, what exactly is going to be the level of collaboration or cooperation between the ECNO and the Girls EA?
So do you want to direct that?
To both, to anyone on the house. Christian.
Yeah, Tom escaped that one. Good job, Tom. You're out of there. Yeah, well done.
Jared, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I just don't want to take 2 questions in a row here. But sure, I mean, and I don't want to say the same thing I said before, so I'm trying to make sure that I say it in a different way. Collaboration has to happen, but we're talking about the whole thing. What's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 months? I don't know what's going to happen over the next 2 to 12 months. That's a different kind of question. I think the next 2 to 3 months we're all focused on what's happening in fall. It's the start of the program for the DA. It's the start of the next year for this group. I think when we have 2 groups that exist, then I think now that's a time for maybe some communication about what happens. Because again, it comes back to choices for players, and the ECNL and the DA are different. They have different options. They have different choices. So maybe once the programs exist, we'll be able to analyze what that is and look at it, and then determine how that communication will exist. But that's not meant to be vague. Christian and I haven't talked about, hey, in 6 months, let's check in and see how things are going.
Actually, I like the optimism of that. Thanks, Jared. One more question, and we'll set the room free. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for April. I played college and pro, and I found a lot of my teammates wanted nothing to do with soccer in terms of
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach that we have in the youth national team program is to, we've shifted our paradigm in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years. And we've tried to inspire players to become masters of the ball. And most of our camps, even our under 14 camp, is far more about inspiring players rather than as selection and identification. So I think as coaches, we have to remember why we came to the game. We came to the game because we love playing soccer, right? Maybe not the people that you're talking about don't want to analyze the game or they don't want to become students of the game, but we love playing the game. If anyone saw the FIFA.com website in the last 2 or 3 days, did you see the photo of Maradona next to Sunil Gulati? And Sunil was in Zurich and he had gloves on and he had socks all the way up. I don't know what his age is. It's somewhere between 50 and 60, but he's playing soccer. So if we can get back to why we came to soccer, and as coaches, I like to tell people, I'm in the inspiration group. My job is to try to inspire players to play the game. And I think that's a really helpful message, whether you're talking about the 6-year-old who's recreational in today's language. I don't even know what a competitive 6-year-old really means. So you keep going up the pipeline for a 58-year-old, if we can get them back focused to the inspiration piece. I think that's what keeps us all in the game, is playing.
Ladies and gentlemen, a final round of applause for our great